Okay, so why don't we get started? Thank you for coming. This is exciting. 2 books in one, a 2 for 1. I'm going to turn it over to Catherine briefly to give our land acknowledgement.
Welcome, everyone. We're so glad to be here. So I just invite us all to bring our minds into this space together for a moment. And in the spirit of Rupert and Jeanette Costa's founding relationship to the campus, we invite you all to respectfully acknowledge with us and recognize our mutual responsibility to the original and current caretakers of the land, water, and air here in Southern California, where I assume most of us are or close by. I'm referring, of course, to the Cahuilla, the Tongva, Luiseno, and Serrano peoples, all of their ancestors and their descendants, past, present, and future. And as we know, UC Riverside is home today to many folks, many of them Indigenous peoples from around the world, including UCR faculty, students, and staff. And so it's our privilege to work alongside them and alongside you in our caretaking and partnership duties and collaborating to care for each other and to care for this place. So in that spirit, we welcome you here today.
Thank you. Okay, so in our 2 for 1 session today, we have 2 professors from the Department of Religious Studies who are going to interview each other on their new books. In addition to her role as a faculty member in religious studies, Amanda Lucia is co-director of the Institute for the Study of Immigration and Religion at UCR. Her first book was Reflections on Amma. Now I can't read, Devotees in a Global Embrace, which won the 2014, I think, Emory Elliott Award. And Michael Alexander is, as you all know, the Maimonides Endowed Chair in Jewish Studies in the Department of Religious Studies. His first book, Jazz Age Jews, won the National Jewish Book Award. The books they'll be discussing today are White Utopias, the religious, God, I have such bad handwriting. What is it, Amanda?
Exoticism.
Exoticism. Of what kind of festivals?
Transformational festivals.
I knew this. And Michael Alexander's book is Making Peace with the Universe, which sounds like a good idea. So I will turn it over to Amanda and Michael, who will take it from here and have better handwriting than I do.
Thanks, Georgia. I didn't think about that when I made the title. A lot of people marble their mouth at the words. There's some big ones in there, so I appreciate that.
Amanda, did you want to go first in terms of just sort of kicking it off, and then you do your spiel and I'll do mine?
Yeah, I think, well, maybe start off with like short, hey, like few minutes of a blurb on each of our books in case you haven't seen them, and then we'll ask each other some questions and then open it up to all of you who probably have other questions in mind and whatever. So yeah, it's very cool to be in such extraordinary company. Thanks, Michael, for being a friend and you know, helping me honestly since the beginning of this book, thinking and framing it and knowing what to do with all of this. It started off when I first got hired here and I wanted to learn more about what Indian Hindus were doing in the Inland Empire and in Southern California in general. So I saw a flyer for Bhakti Fest, which was out in the desert, a big festival celebrating Bhakti, which is a term usually referring to South Asian religions, meaning devotion. So I thought I would go out there and meet all the Indian Hindus. And when I went out to the festival, I found that almost 95% of the people who were attending were white. And so then I started to think about what that meant and what it also meant in terms of the fact that they weren't all kind of, in a lot of the scholarly literature, they're oftentimes positioned, that is contemporary kirtan, yoga, bhakti devotees are positioned to be somewhat superficial in their explorations and hyper-capitalist in their spiritual modalities. And what I found was that, in fact, when I was talking to people, many had been engaged in these fields for decades or even for generations. And so I was curious to write an account that both encapsulated the seriousness of their spiritual explorations, of their endeavors, even if they didn't want to be known as Hindus or as Buddhists, but they wanted to be understood as being serious, and in fact were serious in their pursuits. But then also on the flip side of that, why I was curious as to why these communities were so overwhelmingly and explicitly white and separated from South Asian communities. And this is kind of an extension of previous work that I had done looking at that division that happens so frequently in New Age spirituality. And the book really unfolded from there, taking me to about 130 days of festivals across the world and in California, from Bhakti Fest to Burning Man to Lightning in a Bottle to the Wanderlust yoga festivals. Almost all of which are more than about 80% up to 95% white, and all of which are deeply inspired by South Asian religions. So that's kind of the gist of what the book ended up being, and maybe we can unpack the arguments in it when we do Q&A back and forth. That might keep me to my few minutes here.
All right, that's, yeah, so I'll do a similar kind of a preface about the origin of it. So I had been working on a project that was going to be a dual biography of Golda Meir and Henry Kissinger, leading up to their interactions and confrontations during the Yom Kippur War of 1973. And sort of the presiding question over it had been, do Jews do politics differently? And in the process of it, I've sort of discovered no. The answer was no, and did not want to go forward with the project because I didn't feel like I was really saying anything. And so after years of putting this pretty significant effort into it, I had no project and I had no way to go forward. Simultaneously, I was on the backside of 30 and teaching religion classes for a long time at that point, and standing in front of students, sort of explaining to them how often religion is really just the crassest excuse to support racism and sexism and sexual phobia and nationalism. And I started sort of to ask myself, why are we teaching these kids this? What's the point of this? So I had both. Came to a kind of a crisis. Is any of this actually worth imparting? Is any of this actually worth talking about? And it was personal in the sense that, this is what I was doing for a living. And then and other things about life interrupted. So I really started to wonder about the care of the soul. Like, I've been reading about, I guess, supposedly the care of the soul for a long period of time, and needed some help myself. And I guess the breakthrough came when I realized that so many spiritual confessions that I was utterly familiar with for so long had actually been the result of somebody who had been in the same position. In other words, somebody had had a personal freak out in their own lives. And because religion had been the forum where one would turn to straighten out their lives or to become oriented in the times that they were writing, they had turned to religion. And because in the cases of many of the confessions, because they were geniuses, they were able to write down what had happened, the process of coming to spirituality, and how they managed to get themselves through the crisis, and impart it to traditions that then they became part of the canon. So I had this kind of a realization that religion had been the forum for therapy before there was modern therapy. And so then I started to ask myself, well, did they do it differently than modern therapy? And that became the project. So on the one hand, I wanted to explore that kind of academically, to really compare and contrast, were traditional forms of therapy different than modern ones? And on the other hand, I wanted to also capture the spirit of spiritual adventure that had been so articulated in all of the confessions that I had come across, or so many of them. So I wanted to impart that to the reader as well. And actually, frankly, I wanted to impart it to myself. So that became this project to sort of look through these classic confessions from across the globe, from different times and locations, to try to find those mechanisms of therapy and to see if there is any validity to them in the present. And that's what the book became, Making Peace with the Universe. So I guess it's up to you and me, Amanda, to start asking each other questions. Do you want? I'm happy to start asking questions.
Yeah, go ahead.
All right.
I mean, I do think that's something that we have in common in a way, that many of the people in my fields, they were all, I don't want to say all ever, right? Because whenever you do that, you're wrong. But there were so many therapeutic workshops. There were so many people looking for answers. You know, that was really the core root of what people were up to. So I feel that, and I hear that in your case studies and your own personal story as well.
Yeah, but in yours, the community aspect becomes so crucial to whatever kind of a therapy is being achieved. And I was allergic to that. I was absolutely focused on individuals in their solitude, in their private terror. And so the works are really related and should be more deeply related between community and individual. And we probably could have done better as a team project in a sense, because you sort of get the community aspect. You like talking to people, and I don't like talking to people, and I don't particularly like the community aspect, although I recognize it as really crucial to any project. So mine became really psychologically and interiorly organized. And so I really admired and looking at how you had done it from such a community aspect. There's so many ways that we could sort of continue that aspect of the conversation. But let me ask you some formal questions, and you can ask me some. So one of the things that's really, there are a number of things that are really brave about how you went about this. One of which was to put brackets sort of around the question of appropriation and see a potential for a kind of legitimacy in the explorations that are going on at these festivals, even though they are largely white, and then sometimes they're largely invented. So there are, you mentioned other scholars such as Deepak Sarma, who basically in the arena of Hinduism sees kind of white appropriations of Hindu traditions and religiosity as mimicry and mockery. And you really push back against that. Not that it never occurs, but also see a kind of possibility that mimesis, as you say, can develop into sincerely held identities, and more so. So, I mean, how are you getting along in the world of academia, having said something like that and sort of and claiming that? How is that going? And how is it being accepted?
Right. Well, I mean, Deepak's a friend, so we debate about such things. And I feel like he was really right when he inserted that argument. I mean, he wrote it in kind of a light piece in HuffPost, but it was an impactful piece. And it was a question of, you know, he kind of discarded it in some sense as mimicry or mockery. But I guess I wondered, and I saw from so many of my informants and people I knew in these fields, they were very earnest in their devotions. Now, some of it may be superficial for some, but for others, I think what we're finding is a distinction between people who would usually be identified or identify as converts, and these fields where there's really no path to conversion at all. So I think that I'm not apologizing or issuing apologetics for these people or their politics or their lack of solidarity with people of color whom they're so deeply invested in. But I do want to recognize their impulses and their intent and their earnestness in their spiritual and learning paths.
So the question of conversion really makes it interesting, because in the arena of cultural appropriation, there's no formal mechanism by which somebody can switch teams. In other words, you can enjoy another culture, you can try to participate in another culture, but there's no mechanism by which you can sort of jump sides, as it were, and become part of the new culture. Whereas in the area of religion, often formally, there's a way to do that. You can convert to Judaism, you can convert, there are mechanisms by which you can become baptized and convert to Catholicism, and Buddhism has similar things. Now, I don't remember regarding Hinduism, or if there are formal mechanisms in which you can do that.
I mean, what I'm finding in these fields was that I noted that so much of the interest was in what I called Indic and Indigenous religions. So Indic, quite broadly, meaning religions that were founded in India. So of course, there's paths to convert in Buddhism, there's paths to convert, there's 3HO and Sikhism, but in Hinduism and in native religiosity, both are kind of this mixed religious ethnic category where it's much more difficult to convert if it's possible at all. Sometimes you might find a priest in Hinduism that would allow you to convert. But that question aside, these are oftentimes people who don't want to have any singular allegiance to any particular religion, and they're oftentimes quite allergic to the notion of religion in general, and want to reserve the autonomy for themselves in their own introspections to develop an ethic and a moral of what is right action. They're not looking to the outside for someone like a religious authority to give them permission.
And I guess you have a kind of an extended conversation about that regarding local versus universal.
Yeah, in the yoga chapter for sure, about whether people are depending on local knowledge, meaning knowledge related to India, gurus, lineages, what you might call traditional teachings as the authority structure, or if they're looking at universal knowledge, meaning kind of yoga is for everyone, this knowledge is freely disseminated and anyone can kind of pick it up. And that's where I thought we also had something in common, where experience then becomes the primary barometer for truth claims, right? So it's an introspection into kind of the self in the interior spaces that then determines what is right and just in actuality, not looking outside to, say, a religious institution or religious authority to give that.
Even though the originating traditions had all systems of authority and
it's completely rejecting systems of authority as corrupting and corrupted. And that was something I was super interested in, and I found that to be so vibrantly articulated across these fields. It was not only just a difference between spirituality and religion that was like nebulous or different or ambiguous in any sense, but it was adamant and even aggressively anti-religious, oftentimes pro-spirituality and very anti-religious.
Right, more that they were, yeah. I have one more question about sort of the appropriation aspect of it. So my earlier work was working on basically Jewish appropriations of jazz and African American musics, and I'm at the time the field of whiteness studies was first developing, and for me it was a real head scratcher when people would talk about basically the construction of whiteness, because it seemed to me like such an empty category, in the sense that I could see appropriations almost constituted the entire category, by which I meant there was all kinds of constructions of blackness going on. There were all kinds of places that you could point to in which you could see mimicry and not mockery, not too much mockery. There was some certainly, but a lot of mimicry going on. But when you tried to sort of find the location of what constituted the whiteness, then it was far more slippery. And so, in a sense, when I was reading your book, it did seem like these were exercises in the construction of whiteness, but it was built also similarly so much around appropriation of other cultures. You sort of wondered if there was a there. For you use the language of white viscosity, which is sort of this film holding together the whiteness, even in light of so much appropriations that are actually seem to be the content of the activity. So I just wondered if you could talk a little bit more about that, sort of what the substance or the stuff of whiteness when so much of the activity is appropriation of cultures that are not.
Yeah, I mean, I think in these fields, it's a very, I use the term religious exoticism, right? Which means this kind of romantic vision of the other to fulfill the vacuity of the self, right? In some sense, that this absence of ancestry, this absence of rootedness, of groundedness in culture. And that's, I think, precisely what rubs Deepak Sharma wrong, right? Is this pretending or this imagining that you can presume to become the colonized when in fact you are the colonizer, right? But yeah, I think that there is a searching for roots precisely because, and I'm not a psychologist, so I don't really go there in the book, but precisely because of the emptiness of the category of whiteness, that these are people who are rejecting systems of Western modernity or white supremacy, and they're looking for alternatives. And instead of kind of channeling that energy into critiquing, or they're critiquing by embodying otherness, right? By embodying otherwise, by living otherwise, they are issuing a critique. The trouble I see then is that they're making that critique from a space of white dominance still, right? Of white representation. They're not operating in any kind of like a politics of solidarity or even relationship with the other that they are embracing and embodying, right? It's an imagined other that's kind of based in a just an imagination of what that otherness is, rather than any kind of like direct connection, oftentimes, and the majority of time, I would say.
It's okay.
so much to say there.
Yeah.
But let me take a bit of time to talk to you, because I don't want to overspeak. Yeah. So I want to tell you, I loved this book. I read it like on my spare time with a level of enjoyment that rarely comes across my page for academic books. It was kind of a page turner. I would give it to a friend for Christmas or whatever you celebrate out there, gift giving time. So that was cool. And I felt kind of like almost silly for having written such an academic book when here you were reading and writing the real questions, like these big questions that humanity and all of us are deeply engaged in the dark nights of our soul of like, what are we doing? Here I am just like teaching the classes and going up for merits, and Michael's over there asking like, what does it all mean? So that was fabulous. And I was so brave in a way that I was deeply really impressed with it. And how is that? I just wanted to ask, like, how is that for you now? Do you feel, even my book is very autoethnographic at times. I've written myself in more than even I'm excited about sometimes now in hindsight. How do you feel having written yourself in so deeply to this beautiful, beautiful book?
Well, the portions of yours that are autoethnographic are fantastic. So I hope that they're expanded in the future. I mean, that's the stuff that I really gravitated to. We'll talk more about that maybe in Q&A or in private. Maybe we can get a writing group together. Well, I mean, Kathy has written into the book, my wife, who teaches in the history department, as many of you know, and she's been a great sport about it. Yeah, and I talked about, sort of family troubles, and it wasn't lurid. I didn't talk about anything that was specific. It was just sort of adult relationships with kids and how to manage them or not, and just sort of. So that was part of, the crises that I was going through, and at some point I just felt like it's put up or shut up. It's like. I stopped wanting to be at I stopped wanting I realized that it was time to stop pretending that I was visiting the circus, you know, as an observer, and that I was one of the freaks in the freak show. I also kind of came to a point in which I realized I was never going to sell a lot of copies of books. So then I might as well write what I wanted to, you know. And the writing process itself and the thinking process, I worked out stuff in the book. There's no question in my mind that I sort of was working stuff out. And I had done it because I was looking at people that I admired who had worked stuff out themselves. I mean, the thing that I, you know, like most about the historical cases that I discuss, some of them are famous cases like Socrates, you know, on his trial, and some of them are less famous cases in the West, like a great Sufi master who was not a Sufi master, but a lawyer who sort of ran away and became a Sufi master, was that I admired their intelligence, I admired their sense of reality, and then I admired the fact that they finally gave into their spiritual curiosity that they had felt for so long. And to a degree, I kind of felt like in the academy that we have so often been asked to put brackets on our own spiritual questions, even though we're in the damn religious studies department, right? That we're asked to sort of bracket our own questions to look at the animals in the zoo. And it was like, you know, so 20 years into a career and 30 years into studying religion, and I still didn't have a sense of the care of the soul. So I decided to sort of switch sides, as it were, which is to sort of look at the stuff seriously from my own personal spiritual therapeutic point of view. And, you know, the thing that I discovered in those, I didn't look at Jesus, I didn't look at Muhammad, I didn't look at people that had become deified or, you know, declared themselves to be a god. I looked at normal people who came to a place in their lives in which they had literally no step forward to take. They didn't know the next step to take. And so they opened themselves up to the possibility that they didn't need to know the next step to take, that they were just going to follow their curiosity wherever it took them. And in the case, in those cases, because they're recorded, we know the answers to them, and they recorded them because they came out with good answers. I was inspired by it. So I was really working out my own stuff.
I loved how again and again it was repeated that they kind of looked back at their magnificent achievements and it all looked like nothing, right?
Yeah.
Almost every single chapter, that is something that when you've hit the top of the mountaintop and you look back and you think, this is all shit, right? This doesn't, so what, right? So what if I'm the best at everything? So what if I've conquered every land written? I also thought, it got more intense as the book went on. You know, like Mary Lou Williams, good Lord, right? Everyone around her dies. And then your friend Bobby. And I thought there was something so poignant in this moment where he just kind of points at the space between you and says, I don't know, maybe you can say, what is there in that emptiness?
Well,
is the moral of the story that it's all about relationships, or that it can't be said?
To answer them in order. So the Mary Lou Williams case first is a case of a Black American jazz pianist who was a contemporary and colleague of Count Basie in the 1930s. And she was a pianist for the great Andy Kirk Band, which is an amazing accomplishment for a female instrumentalist in the period, that she was sort of, you know, she was like a Count Basie. And that was in her 20s. In 1954, at age 44, she was playing in Paris. She had some lousy gig, and she was living in some terrible single-room occupancy hotel that didn't have its own bathroom. And she fell apart on the stage. She was like, I can't do this anymore. She literally fell apart. And so I saw, you know, what was crazy about that is that she was a pack rat, constantly kept notes for herself. And diaries. And so I went to the archive in New Jersey at Rutgers, at the Jazz Archive, where she left all of her papers. They were collected by Louis Armstrong for her because they were dear friends. And you could see the handwritten record of her collapse, you know, in pen. And it was just so visceral to sort of watch somebody else's collapse occur. And so any intensity in that chapter is really delivered directly from the intensity that she sort of delivered. And then she went on to write these great jazz masses. So she converted to Catholicism and became a great, opening up of the jazz canon, of the mass canon, as it were. She was able to play a jazz mass at the Vatican in a time when that was not an easy thing to do. The final case that you talk about is the death of a friend of mine from glioblastoma, who died too young with a young child. And in one of our last conversations, it was not a conversation because he was unable to speak. He was, when I was about to go on a meditation retreat with the Sayadaws up in San Jose, sort of a Burmese 30-day silent meditation retreat. And I was trying to talk to him about it, even though he couldn't say anything really, respond to me. And he had previously been interested in Jewish mysticism and meditation, specifically the techniques of Rabbi Abulafia, who is a medieval Kabbalist. And so I said to Bobby, are you interested in that stuff anymore? And he was able to spit out a word that he hadn't been able to speak for months, but he said the word distraction. And so I said, can you explain what you mean by distraction? And we were on the campus of UCLA because he was about to get some brain stuff done at the hospital there. And so he turns to me and he just simply points to the space between us. And I think he was trying to say the space between people is what matters. And that's kind of what I meant when I said that I admire your communality and your sort of your focus on people doing things together and creating these spaces together, because it's not a space that I've explored, although I really admire it and I think I'd like to do it. But it entails talking to people, which is like, and not going into the archives of dead people, which to me is pretty frightening. Anyway.
No, but I thought that was that's precisely what I think I was so struck by that minute, was because if there's a moral of the story to my book, I think it's that don't get distracted, right? Build relationships with people, not things, that people are off down the trail searching for all kinds of meaning, and yet they're kind of discarding that which is right in front of them, which is relationships with people that build meaning and inspiration into their lives, right?
With that, I'd like to actually read from your book, if I may. Sure. Okay. So this is the most amazing passage. The book is fantastic, and you really do both get an academic sense and an analytic sense of sort of how problematic these spaces are, for sure. And yet you do something which you call autoethnography, which is to sort of consider yourself one of the freaks in the freak show, to say, I'm here too, and I'm feeling things too. And so this is the field notes of Burning Man 2017, which is just this gorgeous passage in which let me just read it. This is you at Burning Man 2017. As a cool breeze begins to temper the blasting heat of the afternoon, the wind whips, the pastels begin to sweep across the blue sky. The thoroughfares bustle with a livelier hum. Excitement for the night is building. On top of the RVs, balconies, and the art cars, groups of people stand at attention, facing west as the last glimmer of the sun slips behind the Black Rock Mountain range. Cacophonous howls echo across the playa, haunting and coursing wind as groups of people raise their arms and howl at the setting sun. The howls echo through the wind in a lingering, caressing melody. I strip off my shirt, I tussle my hair free, I hop on my bike, and I ride into the deep playa. It is my favorite part of the day. In earnest, it's the favorite part of my year. As I speed past people, the cool breeze ushers me along and rewards me for a hard day's work. I zoom through the surreal landscape, and nearly everyone I pass smiles and acknowledges me. Perhaps they smile in recognition of my own ecstatic smile that stretches across my face and the uncontrollable giggles that escape from my lips. Effervescent joy in this perfect moment. Truly expressed emotions are contagious. The light is amazing. The mountains flame in hues of pinks, anticipation. The moon rises. The mountains turn purple. The clouds hover, exposing a bouquet of pinks, while a final glint of sunlight holds onto a yellow cloud, retaining the last moments of the day. Art cars and villages begin to light up. Music pumps through the expanding capillaries of the city. LED lights begin to punctuate the dusky horizon. In the distance, the music and excitement. The night will begin soon. The breeze drops even cooler, and I ride rocket fast, then coasting, both alone and together, reveling in my joy, feeling absolutely and utterly free. These are the field notes from Burning Man 2017 in a chapter called Cathartic, I think it's called Cathartic Freedom. Yes, Cathartic Freedom. And in which, I mean, it's just an you drank the Kool-Aid. I mean, right? I mean, this is you sort of, stepping out from the position of zookeeper and into the position of, you're sort of seeing what it's all about. Experiencing the Durkheimian community as it's being formed in the modern era in the year 2017. I think it was just gorgeous, and it's sort of important to your thesis as well, which is that if you just look at it from the political point of view, and the appropriative point of view, and all of which is real, and all of which is true and problematic, you sort of miss the fact that these people are actually creating not just community, but they're creating meaning and significance. So, if you regret putting it in the book and you regret me having just read it, I'm sorry.
No, I mean, to be honest, like dead honest, I tempered that paragraph multiple times and made it less intimate. So there you go.
Okay.
That's the less intimate version. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I believe in that. Like, I'm an ethnographer at heart, and I believe in very close anthropology where you become one and sweat alongside the community and then take a step back and then write your analysis. So in no sense should anyone in the book appear less than human, me included, right? And my perspective, I think, is integral to it. And so in that way, both of our books have that in common, right? There's no hiding. And I think that, when we're creating scholarship these days, it's pretty important to situate ourselves right in the middle in some sense, because that is the only ways through which we are able to see our interlocutors, our historical subjects, our perspective on the field.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also, to sort of feel the reality of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it also gives me a bit of, I think if you can understand the why, right? To try to get inside someone else's common sense, how they are feeling and what they are experiencing. Of course, we can never have that kind of one-to-one relationship. Levinas would tell us, right? There's always some kind of division between subject and object and such, but we can try to get close and to understand why people do what they do, how they understand themselves to be making meaning in their lives. And then telling that story, hopefully we can get at a broader picture of what this is all about.
Right. We should probably open it up for questions. We've really run 40 minutes here.
Look at us. Well done. All right. Yes, if anybody has questions, throw it in the chat. And I'm happy with fielding our own, unless Georgia, you want to field for us, you're welcome to. Yeah, I guess Matt.
For you to do it.
Us?
So raise your hand.
Okay. Yeah, Matt, go ahead.
I have so many questions, but I guess one that came to mind most immediately, and having read both of your books too, I guess I have a question more about where you're at, having written them. And it strikes me that both of your books are coming out, in this really strange year, a strange year for us as community, doing things together, as Michael said, at UCR. And I guess I just would be curious to know, both of you guys coming out of these books that, has so much blood, sweat, and tears in it from both of you. how you're thinking about your teaching in the next phase of your career, like in terms of the building and the doing of religious studies and so on at UCR. I mean, I'm just wondering, and I'm thinking about when we're back in the classroom, hopefully in some future world, not this exact moment, but just, you know, is anything different? How are you thinking about standing up at the front of the class again at the end of these books, in terms of teaching you want to do or develop, or spaces you want to develop?
Well, I'll start quickly. That it's so ironic, right, to be putting out this book about connectivity and festivals and these gatherings of like 80,000 people and cuddle puddles and kisses and hugs and all of these really intimate spaces of sharing in this time when we, if we don't watch out, are so very isolated, right? If we don't build that into our lives in some way. So it's ironic. And then in terms of students, you know, I'm very grateful to UCR students. I think Anthea was at an early talk I gave at UCR. And, you know, without their input, I wouldn't have understood my own research field in the way that I do. So I feel like students with this book in particular really drove the research questions, and that's amazing. I mean, I feel very grateful to be in a place where that can happen, and I don't know what the next project will do for that, but I think we have a huge, amazing resource in UCR students, and if we can only kind of take care of them and keep them afloat in this very weird Zoom world we're all living in, then hopefully we can keep collaborating and build relationships in the future.
Yeah, I don't have anything too profound to add to it. I mean, those of us who were on Zoom in the spring, especially, although now as well, but especially in the spring, we kind of realized fairly quickly that we were the only community in the classroom, was often the only community that a lot of the students had. It was the only opportunity to discuss anything, talk about anything, just sort of have people around. And so the classroom for me kind of transformed fundamentally at that point in time. It stopped being strictly, I mean, I sort of understood more the community aspect of the classroom, and strangely, it occurred on Zoom as opposed to in the seminar or, you know, in front of 350 students. That aspect has become very clear to me now, and that it's really needed. You know, people needed to talk about what was going on in the streets and with the election and this and that, even if it had nothing to do with our classes at the particular moment. There's that aspect to it. The thing for that. The thing that the book clarified for me in particular about teaching, and I guess I've always felt this, but now I'm really explicit about it, is that I feel that our students almost need permission to explore their own curiosity. Um, and so, and I realized it because I realized that I needed a permission to explore my own curiosity. Like I just, you know, I kind of thought that spirituality was, even though I'd been studied it professionally for 20 or 30 years, some way I just thought it was not adult. It was not what adults did. It was not, it wasn't realistic. It wasn't, oh, you know, that's just kind of, you know, genie in a bottle kind of a stuff. And when I gave myself permission to say, "Oh, I don't care," you know, it's my curiosity. It's what it's the arena where I can make some contribution because it's the area where I'm the most interested. You know, sort of the world opened up to me, and I was able to write this thing that I'm pretty pleased with. And I now recognize that in the classroom, that's sort of the only function that I would like to impart to students, which is not necessarily for them to explore their own spiritual curiosity, because they may or may not have it. They may not be me. They're, you know, especially in a class like Religious Studies 12, in which half of the students are taking it for some kind of a requirement, it may not be their thing. But I do feel like they sort of need to know that they do have a curiosity about something, and that it's really that's the arena in which they can make their best contribution. And it's like, they don't know it, and it's not their fault that they don't know it. It's because it's not something that's really talked about that explicitly. So especially in a religion class in which, you know, if they fail our class, and nobody dies on their operating table, you know, or, you know, if they fail our class, nobody's 401k becomes completely insolvent because they screwed up financially. You know, it's like there's no there's no value in the class in a very real sense. The study of spirituality is not about value. It's about something else. And it's something that I think that Amanda was looking for, and I think it's something that Amanda's people were looking for. And I do think that it's appropriate, even in a secular public university, to expose students to the possibility that it's okay for them to look to that as well.
Thank you. Thank you.
People may be dumbfounded.
What was your practice? How did you try different way? I mean, just the practice of writing. How did you actually get it done? Did you have a regular schedule, or did you try different things? And what did a variety of things work, or did one thing work? Either one of you, actually.
Amanda, I just talked for a while. Do you want to go first?
I'm not sure I'm the healthiest model for this.
Yeah.
Well, I never took time off with this book, which was intense. I didn't take like a sabbatical or anything. I had a beautiful, since we're here at CIS, I will thank you all for the second book course release. So I will give credit where credit is due. And that was really helpful. I tried to write for conferences throughout, which the papers then became the shell of chapters for the last couple of years. And then really carving out time to write that I was militant about in my schedule and didn't allow other things to overwrite it. And then I would say, to be frank, this summer, when I was doing proofs and indexing and Black Lives Matter was erupting, and I was writing about whiteness, I became a bit unhealthy and I worked all the time until I just turned it in. That was about a month. But besides that, I was more healthy than that for the most part.
Mine took a long time, but I did work consistently every day for a long time, for 10 years. And I basically treated sacrosanct as much as I could, the hours between 9 a.m. and 1 p.m. for sure, if I wasn't teaching in those times. And there were days that nothing happened, but the screen was open, and the tears were coming, and nothing ended up on the page. But I was not cruising the internet or doing things like that. I was really quite focused. It was hard. It was definitely hard. It was and for me, there was a long period in which it was unpublishable. It was very difficult to get the book published finally, because it doesn't quite fit into an academic category. My idea for it was, the philosophers have this category which is called practical philosophy, which is basically how you can read Aristotle and change your life. It's like self-help philosophy. And because of rationalism, it's kind of seen as a legitimate arena in which to sort of ask those kinds of self-help questions. And so I said to myself, well, why wouldn't spirituality have something similar? And so I tried to do that, and I discovered, having written the book, essentially, that there was no place for it. There was plenty of place for sort of self-help spirituality that was LITE. And there was also plenty of place for self-help spirituality that was denominational, why Buddhism will change your life, why Taoism will change your life. But there wasn't one that was like, from my point of view, which is all the religions are basically saying very similar things. I'm sorry, it's just like this is a very human function. And so what is it about spirituality, wherever you find it on the planet, where has this therapeutic function? And it was really hard to get that published because it didn't fit into a niche. So that was in the fact that it is published, I just consider it something of a miracle, to tell you the truth. And there were days when I thought to myself, well, I'll just have this manuscript in my desk drawer. I'll just have written it for me, I guess. And I was kind of okay with that to a certain degree.
Thank you.
These are both very kind of personal books in a way that, you know, we often think, I mean, I often think of my work as a way of getting out of my like, I don't want to talk about myself. Let me do something academic now. And I don't want to think about myself. And I've always admired creative writers because they just pour themselves, you know, they can just pour themselves into the page in this kind of very intense and personal way. And you both seem to have done it with these books. And I can see that Michael's book is very different from his first book. What about your book, Amanda? Is it very different from your first book? Because you're much more involved, but the other book was kind of.
No, I mean, honestly, I feel like they're similar in the sense that, like, I would say maybe I have an ethnographic style, you know, as I kind of grow up and get old, and I keep kind of reproducing a similar methodology where it's, I think, ethical by being close, by not expecting any less of myself than I expect of people in the field, to be honest about their motivations and intentions. And maybe that's it, you know, like there's a funny picture of me in a turban in the book, actually, from this ritual I did of called Tea and Turbans. And I asked the photographer over brunch in LA one day, you know, gosh, should I put this in the book? Like, I can't imagine, like, I'm mortified that I'm here in a turban because of this silly ritual at Burning Man. And he was like, isn't that what you're expecting all of your informants to do? To consider their whiteness and their silly moments at Burning Man as something important, worth considering? And he caught me off guard, you know, and I was like, okay, yeah, fair enough. Put it in the book, you know. I mean, if you're not on the line in some sense, then it's too easy to hide, you know, and pretend like in 19th century anthropology kind of sense that we don't exist, that we're just kind of the objective eye in the sky.
So there are a couple of questions in chat, and Melissa has her hand up. So Melissa, do you want to go?
Sure, thank you. First of all, thank you so much. I was so excited to have the two of you talking with each other about these amazing books, and what's come out through through your conversation with each other has really made me think some more. So this is in many ways a selfish question. I came to this talk from right in the middle of peer reviewing a manuscript from a study that some folks have done on what they call the values of and the conflicting values of religious studies scholars. Of course, the work that both of you are doing in many ways and also in different ways challenges some of the old school, hard and fast held Religionswissenschaft values of religious studies, which I have a growing amount of impatience with, and actually am increasingly concerned about, because of how I think they exclude certain prospective scholars' bodies from our field. So I don't know if I'm just sort of taking your work and making it fit the things that I think are really important in the field right now. But and I mean this as a compliment. I really think that both of you in different ways are pushing back against the insistence on, as Michael, as you put it, on keeping our own selves out of our research, as though that's ever possible. And the insistence on not doing what gets called normative work, which in the field is very quickly aligned with confessional work, which is absolutely verboten. At least I was trained so hard against that it's been a long journey to sort of realize that that's never been really what I was doing, and that violates all kinds of feminist epistemological principles, and that I actually really didn't believe in what I was very, very, very persistently and firmly trained to do. So I guess what I'm asking do you see what I'm seeing, and how do you think that your work engages with those, what I think are quite, old and dated and stultifying norms? You may or may not think that. What does your work do for these methodological considerations in the field that more and more people, I think, are questioning?
Well, I was kind of released from that concern when I realized that William James himself was composed the varieties of religious experience due to his own personal freakout in his life. So he was in a bad marriage. He had not yet published his first book, which became The Principles of Psychology, which of course ended up being it's still quoted in the scientific literature. So it is, quite a masterpiece. And yet he was sort of in his 40s. He was in a bad marriage. He couldn't publish. He was sucking down nitrous oxide canisters in his offices at Harvard and calling it research. And at some point, he decided to turn to the spiritual masters of his youth to sort of straighten out his life. And that became the Varieties of Religious Experience, which is basically the founding document of American religious studies, so far as I can tell. So I was like, listen, if that was his method, which is to have a personal freak out and try to figure out your life, then it's okay for me too, So I think that distinction, the Wissenschaft distinction, is a kind of it's kind of a fraud. It's just kind of not true. And as you see, for all the reasons that you've pointed out through discussing feminist epistemology, all kinds of people have discovered that over the course of the past 100 years. So why we as a field are caught in it when other fields are not really caught in it in the same way, it's kind of unclear to me. It really is hamstringing the field, if in my view. It is kind of it's condensing the field to irrelevancy in a very severe way.
Yeah, I think I'm less comfortable. I'm in process, I would say, because I am afraid of, maybe it's just that I have it so deeply ingrained in my cellular structure that it is verboten, right? That you cannot do that kind of confessional work. But yeah, I'm very convinced by Chris Driscoll and Monica Miller's recent work on the ways in which this positionality in the field is intimately related to whiteness and European supremacy, and is running counter to feminist epistemology, is running counter to ways in which, I certainly fall in line with the anthropological notion that there is no objective, invisible, neutral space, period. So I think that's why I write myself into it, so at least people can see where I am in relation to the field.
So there's some questions in the chat. One's from Deborah Wong. You were each thinking about expanded readerships, I think. How did that affect your choice of publisher? And then a second question, as the second published book project, how did you both manage unique roadblocks within your research process? What were some roadblocks that you ran into as a second project that you did not anticipate?
I can answer Deborah's question first, in that I don't know, I kind of set out to write an academic book, but I think that the publisher recognized that certainly this is a bit of a hot topic right now, and I feel like I do write in ways that are legible to interested readers. And the fact is that many of my informants in these fields, like contemporary yogis and people who would be interested, they're highly educated. So there's absolutely a sense that it will be read. For good or for bad, for my own Twitter feed, we'll find out, but it will be read by people in the field as well as academics. And I went with UC Press just because I had gone with them in the past, and I was grateful that they said yes.
I mean, I think I mean, Amanda sort of answered a lot of it for me. Let me go to Jay Selke's question, which is also asked, which is about the second published book. How did you manage unique roadblocks? The roadblock for the second book, and I expect it'll be the roadblock for the third and the fourth, or how many ever there are, is that it never gets easier. It never becomes like, oh, you know, I'm just phoning this in. And it was hard. And I expect the next one will be hard, unless unless you're the kind of person that wants to repeat yourself a lot, which I don't think you need to do in press, because the book exists in the world, and so you don't need to be repeating it over and over again. You know, I mean, ultimately, you're the one that spends the most time with the manuscript, working on it. So it really has to be your curiosity that you're working through. And insofar as it's your curiosity that you're working through, you don't know the answer. You know, you don't know what you're looking for. And I do remember reading an interview with Philip Roth in the very end of his career, in which he was also being asked about the process, and he was like 20 novels in, and he was like, it never gets easier. Like, every single one is hard. Like, every single one, you know, you're always going up the mountain. You're always starting with blank pages. And so I think that was something of it was a little bit of a surprise to me, I guess, how similar it was to the first project, and how similar it was to even just the writing of the dissertation. It's just, it's uphill, and it's never not.
For me, the second project, it was different in that I think it's more controversial. It's more of a topic, and I think that getting that voice right, where it was both critical and empathic and humanizing to people, was extraordinarily difficult. And then logistically, I know people when I was in grad school like my professors used to say, oh, aren't you lucky that you're, you know, able to just focus on reading and writing? And I was always really annoyed at them, thinking that, you know, they were not on my side. But now I kind of feel myself in that other position, to where reading, the level of learning a new field of kind of critical race and critical whiteness while writing constantly and teaching, definitely pushed the boundaries of what I thought was feasible. So I hope that I have continued stamina for future projects. But I mean, also, I mean, come on, like camping 135 days, like hauling coolers and building camps and carrying refrigerators and things that really were exhausting, particularly about this book, that may not be exhausting about other projects.
Great. It looks like that's it. We've been going for about an hour, Georgia.
Right. And I want you to read the chats, because there are lots of you're going to get a lot of new book sales. There are lots of good compliments. So thank you. This has been a great conversation. We all want to read both books now. And thank you so much for doing this.
Thanks for hosting CIS. You guys are always our champions and supporters, and we really appreciate it so much.
And, you know, you really do actually give a sense of community to the campus that is otherwise not really there.
Yeah.
That's for real. So thank you. And
Well,
for including us.
Thank you. We are only as good as you guys, so keep it up.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks, everybody.